The moment you cease pursuing women is the moment everything alters. Not merely your romantic life, but your whole vibration, your concentration, your path. You begin to recognize the quantity of your strength you are relinquishing, the sheer amount of your hours spent attempting to validate a thing that ought to have been clear from the beginning. You were never intended to pursue. You were intended to construct. The pursuit is the thing that diverts most men from developing into who they were meant to become. And the instant you retract your focus, the world appears to awaken and pay attention. It's incredible how quickly things transform when you refocus your vitality. The very men who couldn't receive a response from women abruptly find people returning their calls. The same individuals who were unseen in the masses suddenly begin to earn esteem. This isn't sorcery. It's energy. When you cease pursuing, your worth realigns. You shift from desperate to desired, from unseen to compelling. Since nothing draws people in quite like a man who appears to require nothing from anybody. Let me be candid with you. Most men fail to grasp how much of their self-concept is constructed around hunting for female validation. Every piece of clothing, every social media update, every workout, every triumphant tale is subconsciously engineered to scream, "Notice me." And that is precisely the reason nobody does. People can detect desperation just as canines sense fear. You cannot feign self-esteem. You either possess it or you bleed it through every message, every reply, every behavior. The day you cease pursuing, you cease bleeding. And the quiet that ensues feels awkward initially. But that is where your strength is regenerated. Attempt this. Go 30 days without pursuing anyone. No follow-up texts, no pleading for acknowledgement, no justifying yourself to someone who is disregarding you. You'll experience withdrawal as if you're detoxifying from a substance. Because you are. You have been hooked on external approval for decades. The quiet feels agonizing at first, but then a remarkable thing occurs. You begin to hear your own thoughts again. You begin to value things you had forgotten. Your skill, your physical condition, your monetary situation, your tranquility. That is the instant the transformation commences. In a matter of weeks, others perceive something has changed. Women who formerly ignored you begin to view your content. Colleagues who overlooked you begin to demonstrate respect. Acquaintances treat you in a new way because energy cannot be faked. You move more slowly, speak less, offer smaller smiles, and somehow this makes you 10 times more engaging. You've transitioned from performer to presence. The same society that disregarded you is now intrigued. Why does he no longer care? Why does he appear so self-contained? That intrigue is attraction. That composure is power. Here is the reality. When you were pursuing, you were instructing the world on your treatment. You were signaling that you required attention to feel whole. So the world reacted by denying it, as nobody compensates desperation. But when you cease pursuing, the signal alters. You convey one singular truth: I am fine regardless. And that statement is magnetic. People, particularly women, find themselves drawn to the man who seems like he doesn't require the crowd's validation to understand his own identity. When you cease pursuing women, you cease pleading for energy that ought to be flowing toward you. You cease starting your day wondering who is focused on you, who is messaging, who is engaging with your posts. You awaken and consider, what am I constructing today? That is when you transition from consumer to creator, from passenger to pilot. And the paradox? That is when everyone suddenly desires a place in your vehicle. It's amusing. When you're pursuing, you believe you're demonstrating strength. You believe you're confirming interest, confirming value. But what you are truly displaying is doubt. You are communicating, I require you to acknowledge me so I can feel acknowledged. And that is the very thing that extinguishes attraction. People do not pursue what is readily accessible. They pursue what is rare. The second you stop running after women, you become the rare commodity. You become the energy they wish to comprehend, not the one they are attempting to avoid. You have likely observed how women behave distinctly around men who don't appear overly affected. They move closer, their humor changes, they take the first step. Why? Because the man who refrains from pursuit compels them to qualify themselves. He doesn't achieve this with arrogance or manipulation. He achieves this by living, by concentrating on himself, on his objectives, on his mission. That energy is uncommon in a world filled with individuals desperate for acceptance. The man who is occupied building something tangible lacks the time to pursue fleeting excitement, and that factor alone renders him magnetic. A client of mine shared with me, "When I ceased pursuing women, I unintentionally received a promotion." I asked what he meant. He said, "I had so much time and energy remaining that I started to excel in my job. I was no longer monitoring my phone every 10 minutes or fantasizing about someone who was not texting back. I simply worked." 2 months passed. He was leading a team, and abruptly, the same women who once dismissed him began to express interest. The lesson is, success in itself is alluring. When you cease pursuing women, you begin pursuing growth. And growth causes the world to pursue you. You cease viewing women as objectives and start viewing yourself as one. You cease trying to persuade anyone to select you and start asking, "Am I even open to being selected at this time?" That is when the entire dynamic changes. When your time gains value, your attention becomes a luxury. When your energy becomes scarce, people begin to handle it with reverence, and you grasp something profound. The world rewards focus, not desperation. Every hour you commit to pursuing someone who doesn't desire you is an hour robbed from the version of you that everyone else would have pursued. You will begin to sense it, that subtle change in how people react to you. The woman who used to ignore your messages now texts twice. The friends who once exploited your time now ask with courtesy. Even men begin to interact with you differently, because dominance is not about ego. It is about presence. When your energy stops yelling, it starts commanding. And the reason it is effective is straightforward. People finally perceive that you do not require them. You are not awaiting validation. You are occupied validating your own existence. The pursuit was never about women. It was about control. Attempting to force someone to recognize your worth because you failed to fully recognize it yourself. When you at last stop, you are not merely abandoning a habit. You are reclaiming your sovereignty. You stop playing defense and start living on offense. You stop hunting for attention and start commanding it. You stop requesting love and start embodying it. That is when the world pivots and begins to ask, who is that man? What changed? At first, the quiet feels foreign. You are accustomed to chasing stimulation, alerts, focus, approval. When that vanishes, you begin to question yourself. You assume something is amiss because no one is contacting you. But remain in that quiet long enough and you will begin to perceive something deeper. Peace. Genuine, unshakable peace. The type that is not contingent on anyone's reply or acceptance. That is the juncture where everything starts to reform itself around you. You see, energy does not vanish. It reroutes. The time you once spent dissecting messages begins to power your career. The effort you once invested in people who were indifferent starts to fuel your ambitions. The focus that once hunted for validation now hunts for progress. And suddenly opportunities begin to manifest from thin air. You encounter new people effortlessly. You are seen for the correct reasons. You feel grounded, in command, untouchable. You did not transform into someone else. You simply stopped draining your potential into dead ends. Here is what they fail to mention. Pursuing women is merely a symptom. The core problem is pursuing validation. Once you overcome that dependency, you begin to see how much of your existence was structured around proving you are sufficient. You begin to understand you were attempting to gain respect that ought to have been self-bestowed. And once you cease doing that, the world reflects it. People treat you as you treat yourself. When you begin to honor your time, others do as well. When you cease apologizing for your presence, people begin to appreciate your presence. A friend of mine underwent this change without even noticing. He ceased pursuing women following a harsh breakup. In place of dating, he went to the gym, concentrated on his company, and got serious about his routines. 6 months later, he was unrecognizable. Not due to his appearance, but due to his bearing. Confident, composed, quiet. The very woman who abandoned him for someone more thrilling returned, asking to reconnect. He did not refuse her out of bitterness. He was simply no longer interested. His silence had constructed a fortress around him. That is the outcome when you stop pursuing. The very individuals who once dismissed you begin to wonder why they cannot access you anymore. The same women who overlooked you begin to act puzzled by your composure. They will challenge you again, merely to determine if they still hold that power. But you will not even register the pull this time because you have surpassed the game. You have become too centered on your mission to be diverted by anyone who fails to align with it. And here is the most paradoxical element. The instant you cease to care, people begin to care profoundly. When your focus is no longer given freely, it becomes precious. The world does not compensate desperation. It compensates direction. When you are heading somewhere with certainty, everything in your vicinity tries to match your pace. That is why men who cease pursuing women often begin pursuing their ambitions, and their ambitions begin to attract everything they once pleaded for: attention, respect, options, admiration. Not because they exerted more effort, but because they stopped exerting it where it was futile. You will observe your posture improve, your voice lower, your words gain substance. You stop justifying yourself, stop revealing too much, stop acting. You no need to demonstrate anything any longer. That is authentic confidence. Quiet, measured, controlled. It is the kind that pulls people in effortlessly, the kind that communicates, "I do not require you to see my value, I am already aware of it." And the world, especially women, cannot oppose that level of certainty. It is scarce, it is potent, it is masculine energy in its most unadulterated form. When you cease pursuing, you cease living like a pauper and start moving like a king. Not due to possessing a diadem, but because you at last hold yourself as if you merit one. You begin to observe that the world yields differently when you are not chasing. Doors open more easily. People honor your time without being asked. The very opportunities that once passed you by now arrive in your possession. That is not fortune. That is alignment. When you cease projecting desperation, you begin projecting value, and value attracts. It does not push. The universe compensates men who move with certainty, not men who pursue with anxiety. The most incredible part? The same vitality that was directed at pursuing women now transforms into momentum. You rise earlier, you work out harder, you act faster, you begin to deliver results that resonate more loudly than words ever could. And abruptly, women are pursuing you. Not because you are attempting to impress them, but because you are impossible to overlook. Your focus, your tranquility, your discipline, that is the new currency no one can counterfeit. You have become the man people discuss when you are absent from the room. Let me share something few men ever grasp. Attraction is not about appearance or wealth, it is about gravitational force. When you are centered, when you possess purpose, when you are no longer diverted by every attractive face that passes, you create a pull. You enter a space, and people take note without understanding why. You are not performing, you are not seeking validation, you are simply existing. And that authenticity, that self-possession, is irresistible in a world hooked on pretense. I witnessed this occur with a person who was formerly the biggest people-pleaser I knew, unable to say no. Persistently texting, persistently pursuing, he burned out and opted to pause dating just to concentrate on himself. 3 months later, he launched a podcast, secured a promotion, and hit the gym regularly. Within 6 months, he had numerous women interested. And here is the development. He desired none of them, because he was no longer pursuing, he was selecting. That is the change. You transition from begging to choosing, from asking to permitting. And when that occurs, your entire existence feels different. You stop obsessing over every encounter. You stop attempting to make people like you. You merely express yourself and allow the appropriate ones to discover you. And they shall. Because the world invariably finds men who stand still with purpose. Women, in particular, are drawn to direction, not chaos. They can sense when you are at peace, when you are not trying to impress, when you are focused on something larger. That is when they approach, curious, intrigued, desiring to be a part of your orbit. But here is the actual victory. It is not about women anymore. It is about the man you become when you stop pursuing them. You start pursuing clarity, you pursue purpose, you pursue mastery, you pursue peace. And in that process, you become the type of man who has no need to pursue anyone. Because everything intended for him naturally moves toward him. That is what genuine attraction is. It is the universe acknowledging that you have stopped pleading and started building. When you cease pursuing women, you cease fleeing from yourself. You sit with your own mind, your ambitions, your quiet. You stop fearing solitude and, instead, you begin to desire it. Because solitude becomes your studio, your energy source, your training area. Every quiet evening, every solitary weekend, every moment you invest in self-improvement instead of chasing another's attention, that is when your worth compounds. That is when the world begins to notice your absence and desire your presence. That is when you finally understand you never needed to chase. You only needed to become. Once you stop pursuing, everything you once battled for starts to appear on its own. You are not pleading for respect any longer. People simply offer it. You are not compelling conversations. They occur organically. You are not attempting to demonstrate your worth. Your achievements speak for you. That is the quiet strength derived from no longer being desperate for validation. The world yields to men who no longer require it. You will observe how tranquil your days become. There is no more obsessing over messages, no more uncertainty about where you stand. You know your position, with yourself. That certainty radiates. You enter a room, and people sense it before you utter a word, because composure is the most powerful signal a man can transmit. In a world of noise and theatrics, the one who does not try becomes the one everyone tries to contact. There is a principle few men grasp until they experience it. When you cease chasing, you begin attracting, not just women, but success, peace, and power. Chasing generates resistance. Attraction generates flow. The more you attempt to grasp something, the quicker it eludes you. The moment you let it go, life returns it stronger. That is why men who stop obsessing over women suddenly advance in every domain. Their finances get better, their confidence solidifies, their social sphere improves, because all the energy they once directed outward is now constructing an empire inward. I know a man who was a habitual chaser. Constantly on apps, constantly striving to impress. One day, he simply grew weary, deleted everything, and vanished. 6 months later, he had launched a company, hit the gym, reformed his habits, and was living with a tranquility he had never known. He told me, "The same women who dismissed me now inquire how I achieved it." The solution was simple. He stopped pursuing them and started pursuing himself. That is when the dynamic shifted. When you stop pursuing women, you do not become cold or aloof. You become focused. You start to grasp that your life is not intended to revolve around anyone else's approval. You were never created to be a secondary character in another's narrative. You were intended to be the author of your own. The more you compose that narrative with intent, the more the right individuals materialize in it. Not because you tracked them down, but because your energy summoned them. It is almost poetic. The same women who once declared, "He is too quiet, too serious, too focused," are the ones now whispering, There is something about him. They sense the change but cannot articulate it. It is not arrogance, it is awareness. You have ceased pursuing what was never meant for you. You are simply moving in your path, and the world is hastening to catch up. This is not a strategy. It is not manipulation. It is equilibrium. You are not denying your attention. You are safeguarding it. You are not disregarding women. You are prioritizing yourself. And in a culture that has conditioned men to pour ceaselessly into others while depriving themselves of purpose, that action alone makes you uncommon, and anything uncommon becomes valuable. So here is the reality. When you cease pursuing women, the entire world begins pursuing you. Because the world yearns for centered men. Men who are stable, grounded, disciplined. Men who are not swayed by fads or superficial traps. Men who do not plead for attention, but command it through high standards. The moment you become one of those men, life begins to organize itself around your frequency. You do not need to pursue the world. The world will always pursue order. And you just embodied it. When you finally stop pursuing, you realize the game was never about women. It was about energy. Where you direct it, who you grant it to, and whether it is constructing you or depleting you. You look back and see how much of your strength you squandered attempting to prove your worth to people who could not even perceive it. You were showing love to those who confused it with convenience, showing loyalty to those who mistook it for weakness. But now that version of you is gone. The man who chased is gone. The man who attracts has emerged. You begin walking differently, not because you are trying to appear confident, but because you genuinely are. You speak less because your presence already conveys enough. You stop apologizing for desiring peace. You stop justifying why you disappeared. You stop diminishing yourself to be understood by people who cannot meet you. Because once you have experienced self-respect, cheap attention loses all its appeal. The world begins reordering itself around this new version of you. Opportunities you once pleaded for now seek you out. People who ignored you now cannot stop discussing you. You do not pursue approval, but somehow you are more respected. You do not pursue attention, but somehow you are always seen. You do not pursue love, but somehow you are surrounded by it. Genuine, effortless, unforced. That is the paradox of power. The less you require it, the more of it you possess. And here is the true lesson most men never grasp. Pursuing women was never the issue. Forget the women. Pursuing anything outside of yourself always concludes the same way. Fatigue, disappointment, void. The moment you redirect that pursuit inward, life starts pursuing you outward. Because energy follows creation. When you create progress, people follow. When you create value, opportunities follow. When you create peace, admiration follows. The world does not react to noise, it reacts to movement. And you, at last, are in motion. You stop needing to prove you are valuable. You know you are. And that knowing changes everything. Your tone, your posture, your presence. You are no longer reacting to life, you are directing it. You are no longer pleading to be selected. You are too occupied selecting what merits your time. That is when you become magnetic. Not because you are trying to attract, but because you have become something worth attracting. So remember this. You do not win by chasing. You win by becoming. Become disciplined. Become focused. Become intentional. Construct yourself until pursuing anyone feels like an affront to your potential. Because once you truly grasp your worth, the world does not just notice, it orbits. That is when you grasp it was never about getting women to pursue you. It was about becoming the kind of man the entire world cannot help but follow. If this content resonated deeply with you, do one thing. Stop chasing, start building. Like this content, send it to a friend who needs this message, and follow for more. Because this is your call to action. Your prompt that the world doesn't pursue chaos, it pursues strength. And the instant you cease pursuing, you embody it.